Okay, so it's been a while since I did my last video on The Handmaid's Tale. I know I've been focusing more on feminine gospels, but I'm going to try and get more done on Handmaid's Tale. So today I'm looking at section 3, which is chapter 7, and this is the second night section. So something Margaret Atwood does throughout the novel is every other section is called night, meaning that there are in fact 7 chapters called night, and then section 5 is nap, and that's the equivalent of a night section, and each night section is only a single chapter. And so section 3 is chapter 7, and what I've done is I've separated the chapter into 4 sections. You might have just noticed me sneakily remember to change 2 of them, and I'm going to go through very briefly each of those 4 sections to give you an overview of the chapter as a whole. But first of all, just to note, so this is our second night chapter. It's really quite different from the first night chapter. First night chapter is the first chapter, which we've looked at, and in that the narrator is reflecting on what it was like to sleep at the Red Centre. All of the night chapters, really, at least up in, sorry, I keep saying chapters, I mean sections. All of the night sections, at least up until section 13, are really times of reflection. They are her time for herself. She's in control, but she's still really restrained. She says that she has to be quiet, she has to be still. As long as I don't move, as long as I lie still, are her words. But interestingly, from the point of later night chapters, she doesn't always do this. She's craving freedom, which is restricted, and this is really very typical. Okay, sorry about that. My sister just came in and interrupted me. So what I'm going to start with is a reflection on adolescence. So I'm not going to read out the whole passage or anything, but by this I mean from where it says, "Somewhere good, Moira sitting on the edge of my bed, up until..." I'm borrowing $5 off you, okay, and it is quite a short it's quite a short extract, probably only a couple of hundred words. Now, there are a few things which I think it's important to pick up on in that time. So one of the first things which our narrator focuses on is the fact that there is different clothing. Moira is wearing purple. She's wearing an earring, which and a gold fingernail. And these ideas contrast completely with what we've learnt the handmaids wear, their long red dresses with, well, white wings. Other things we pick up that are different are the fact that they're talking about dates, They have the freedom to choose men rather than being allocated. Drinking beer, and smoking, all quite normal. And you've also got the comparison that we know from the visit to the shops that actually women aren't allowed to read now, but before they had school, college, and they studied things like economics, English, and psychology. And all three of those subjects are things that we study now. It would not be an unusual mix for someone to be studying at A level. Oh, sorry. They have a freedom of access to books. Not restricted, so they're allowed to read uncensored. Her book is even open, and she now describes this as extravagantly, especially as it's face down. This idea that they were really casual. No, there was no second thought. And her view of how she saw it then has been tainted by Gilead, because when she had those books face down on the floor, that didn't seem extravagant. It's only now she reflects on it from Gilead that it gains that. Rape is also seen to be a current theme of the time before. It's got the suggestion that this, although she's expressed nostalgia, might also be a degree of mythophilia. So mythophilia is effectively looking back on the past, not how it was, but how you think it was, how you would like it to have been. There's a really good article written by Asami Nakamura, which you can, if you Google, is called "I'm a Refugee from the Past, the Function of Nostalgia in Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale," and you can find an article on Google. It's quite long, about 17 pages, but I found it useful. And you've got this idea that although she's acknowledging rape was a thing in the past, if we look at her language throughout most of the book, she is quite nostalgic towards the past, and she looks at it quite positively. So you've got the suggestion that the time before was dangerous and there was potential sexual exploitation and abuse. It's also quite poignant for an audience today because of the sexual harassment cases, which are around, with lots of people now coming out and exposing people who sexually abuse them. But interestingly, in this, they're actually joked about. You know, they have freedom to the extent that when Moira says, oh, I wrote my paper on date rape, the narrator replies, date rape, I said. You're so trendy, it sounds like some kind of dessert. Date rape. I'm sorry, I don't know what accent that was. But suggesting that it wasn't actually a big deal. Then the next section in the chapter is the book burning. So book burning is something that really, it automatically reminded me of Hitler, the Nazis, and yeah, book burning. This is book burning of the time force, so it's not people from Gilead who are restricting, but people of the time before. And we get the impression that these are probably feminist protesters, and that Offred's mum is a second wave feminist. Now the book, or the magazines that they're burning, our narrator describes one. It's suggested probably potentially a pornographic magazine. It's got a woman with no clothes on hanging from the ceiling by a chain. But certainly not a magazine which would be considered appropriate to a second wave feminist, because it would be a sign of female oppression. And what you've also got within this, which I think is almost more important than the book burning, is the narrator's relationship with her mother. Because they'd gone to the park to feed the crumbs. Sorry, not to feed the crumbs, to feed crumbs to the birds, or to feed the ducks. And as soon as the narrator saw the woman burning books, she knew that that's what they were really there for. And she felt betrayed, really. We don't know how old she is. She asks twice how old she was. But I sort of imagine 8 or 9. And there's the fact that her mum would rather spend time with her friends than her daughter. And you got, did she suffer from neglect of some sort in her early life? Because although Saturdays were supposed to be her day, there's this implication that it's quite common for her mother to change things. The other interesting thing is the fire imagery, because fire imagery is really traditional in literature. For me, as I'm studying at A-level, Jane Eyre has a lot of fire imagery in, as does Rebecca. But I mean, so does The Taming of the Shrew by Shakespeare. It's really a very widespread traditional image, and especially because it can connote also passion. But what they're burning here is pornography, and sometimes people would turn and say that they're driven to pornography through a type of passion, that's sexual gratification. So I think that's worth noting, especially in relation to AO4. Then the next section is shorter, probably a similar length to the reflection on adolescence, but also probably the most poignant. Okay, so this is the whole of the loss section, which you can see I've annotated. I'm not going to run through my indications. I hope that they're quite self-explanatory. If you have any questions, please ask in the comments. I think the only real things that I wanted to pick up on specifically were probably how this introduces the loss of her daughter, because we've only recently learned that she has a daughter, and what we don't know yet is the story of her escape. So what's going on here is completely unknown. It doesn't fit into the narrative. It's certainly a deviation. And you've got this idea that she has lost her daughter, which is really key because the narrator is so focused on her daughter, understandably, really. And I would encourage you to pause the video to read through my notes, which are clearly colour-coded. As I say, I hope my way of annotating makes sense to you, and if you have any questions, please do ask. But then if we move on to the final section, which I've named You, and it is quite an interesting section. There are really two key themes in it, so perhaps I should call it You, but also Story, because they're the two key things. Is whether the narrator can believe that what she's telling is only a story. She wants it to be a story, but is it a story? It's interesting that she's saying it's a story that she's telling, in my head. Okay. In her head. Because obviously we're seeing this written down on paper. And it sort of hints to the fact that she isn't writing this, that she's telling it. Which is furthered by the next line. Tell rather than write, because I have nothing to write with, and writing is, in any case, forbidden. And what you've got in that clearly is a reminder of restriction. And really what this whole section is about, the You, the Story. I would say there are two main themes. One is isolation and connection, and the other is restriction. Both of these are themes which are very typical to dystopian works. So isolation and connection, you can link to 1984, which is a good comparative novel to look at with The Handmaid's Tale. 1984 is quite a classic dystopia, and the protagonist of 1984, his name's Winston, and he is certainly isolated, but he seeks connection with others. And what you have in 1984, for example, which highlights the restriction, is every single house, in fact every room, has a telescreen, and those telescreens, as well as showing television to the inhabitant of the room or the house or the flat, actually show the inhabitant. They effectively work as spy cameras. Now clearly Offred isn't restricted in that sense, but her choices are restricted. Indeed, as are Winston's in 1984. And also, if another good comparative dystopian idea is Margaret Atwood's trilogy, the Oryx and Crake trilogy, which again explore these themes of restriction and isolation and connection. And I think this isolation connection is in the last 4 lines. You can mean thousands. I'm not in any imminent danger, I'll say to you. I'll pretend you can hear me, but it's no good, because I know you can't. You is in some ways a friend. But what I find really interesting is that she says in one line that she'll tell you that you're not in any immediate danger. And 2 lines later it says, but it's no good. Which indicates to me that she feels like she is in immediate danger. And that's what the Gileadian regime feels like for the narrator. It feels like constant, immediate danger. So that's quite a brief overview of chapter 7 in some ways. I hope I've picked up on some useful things. This is a list of my key quotes. So, good riddance to bad rubbish, date rape, where is she, you are unfit, I'll pretend you can hear me, dear you, the night is my time out, where should I go, I know I lost time, and you've killed her. Not in that order, and that's not the order they appear in the chapter, but those are my key quotes for this section. I hope it's been useful, and I'll try and get a video out on waiting room in the next week.